Welcome to the Training Innovation Project, or TIP, Learn at Lunch, where our goal is to build the capacity of vocational rehabilitation professionals to serve people with disabilities and engage with employers through innovative training and technical assistance. Today, we will discuss an important and timely topic: why competitive integrated employment matters to businesses. Our presenter is Mary Reed Sheffer, Director of Employment Services at Mattingly Edge, where she has provided customized employment for over 7 years. In addition to earning an MBA from the University of Louisville, she holds multiple certifications, including systematic instruction, discovery, and job development through Mark Gold and Associates. Mary Reed is the chair of the Employer Education and Engagement Committee on the Kentucky Employment First Council. We will leave time for questions at the end, but feel free to put anything in the chat that you would like to discuss, and we will do our best to address it after the presentation. Thank you so much for joining us, and I'll turn it over to Mary Reed.
Hi, everybody. I'm so glad to be here today. I'm already seeing some of my favorite names roll into the audience, so glad to have everybody here. Today we'll be talking about competitive integrated employment and why it should matter to businesses. So I know a lot of us here are service providers. It's pretty obvious to us why it's needed and why it is a good thing. But there are always new and creative ways to talk about it with each other and with employers and employer partners. And so that's what we'll be focused on today, is how you can frame and situate customized employment and competitive integrated employment into the larger landscape of work right now. So, one of the first points that I have to get across when I'm talking about competitive integrated employment is why it doesn't exist already. So, from a very early age, separation begins between people with and without disabilities. This is the experience for most people. It was certainly my experience, but often with the best intentions, special becomes equivalent to separate. So, for people with disabilities, there are often separate schools or separate classrooms, special or separate sports, special ministries, special places to live in residential facilities, and most recently, special places or special departments where only people with disabilities are employed. So that is the first and most important thing to realize about competitive integrated employment, is that it's not coming from nowhere. There is a reason we have to have a strategy, and it's unfortunate, but the way that we frame it can mean everything to getting rid of special or separate places for people with disabilities so that we can all live better lives by having known each other. So while there are all these separate spaces, meanwhile, in the work landscape, there's a lot of things happening. We, as a society, know it as the workforce crisis. But if you were like me, you may not know what the workforce crisis meant or where it was coming from. And I think that this is a really important place to start when we are talking about competitive integrated employment, is not the feel good or the statistics on people with disabilities staying at a job and working their hardest forever. It's why we need more people engaged in the workforce. So I'm going to go through a couple of graphs that show where this workforce crisis is coming from. The first one is pretty obvious, and it's that there is, first of all, a spike in retirements since the pandemic, along with an aging population. So we all know that the boomer generation is one of the largest, and because the boomer generation is aging out of the workforce, we are losing a lot of workers, and we have open positions. I saw in the chat that there's an echo. I'm not sure where that's coming from. Beth, do I have an echo?
Okay. I'm not experiencing anything.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure. Sorry, before I go on.
It's okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So you see that blue line, there's a big spike in retirements because of the pandemic. But in general, the actual number of retirements are trending upwards in general, regardless of the pandemic. And that is because of an aging working population. So first of all, we are losing a lot of our workforce simply through aging, which we could have anticipated and we have anticipated for years. The next piece is declining birth rates and delayed birth rates as well. So people are having babies less and they're having them later on in life. And so there is simply not going to be the amount of workers born that we need to fill existing positions in the coming years. Additionally, I think probably a lot of people um, on this call and just in general know is skyrocketing. So it is considered to be of someone's income, but now over 51% of people are spending more than 20% of their salary on childcare. So it is not an affordable thing anymore. People are having to stay home in the workforce. And then another one is declining immigration. So less people are coming to the US. And so this declining immigration and increasing immigration is going to have a huge impact on our workforce. So with all of these things kind of coming together at once, we are looking at the like in the millions of a shortage of workers in the next 10 years. And that's a big deal to employers who are going to have to start being more creative in their hiring processes. There won't be a choice. We're going to have more tasks that need doing and not enough people to do them. Our demand is going to outweigh our supply for workers. And so competitive integrated employment can serve as a solution to that. So there are a lot of articles coming out now from Harvard Business School and Accenture and the Wall Street Journal, encouraging employers and business leaders to think about looking more at what we call hidden workers. So populations of workers who want to work and are either not working or who are underemployed. So people with disabilities, specifically people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, are a huge piece of those hidden workers. And so competitive integrated employment is a way that we as providers can talk about what it looks like to start to integrate people with disabilities into the workforce where maybe they have not been before. So I did want to take a minute to talk about what competitive integrated employment actually is, because I think the name is actually pretty confusing. So I've broken down the definition of what it is, and I want to talk a little bit more about what each piece of this means. So I think the most confusing word as part of this phrase to me is competitive. That is something that I was taught as a practitioner of customized employment, is that people with disabilities shouldn't have to compete with non-disabled employees to be able to contribute to a workforce. And so with a little more clarification, it became clear to me that competitive is not necessarily competing with candidates without disabilities, but it is more that they have access to the same opportunities. So competitive in that anyone could hold these jobs, and that they are compensated at or above minimum wage, and hopefully the customary rate at which other people in this field or in similar positions are paid. So not just above 725, but what is Sally next to me making? I should be making something similar to her if I'm doing similar work. Competitive also means receiving the same level of benefits. So that one might be eligible for insurance if working the correct amount of hours. Or eligible for promotions that anyone who is a hard worker at their workplace might want, or raises after a certain amount of time. And then integrated is more obvious. So at a location where the employee is working alongside people without disabilities. And I think that's one of the most important parts of competitive integrated employment, is that, we think about inclusion as something that happens to people with disabilities, that we as people without disabilities are going to welcome people in, and that it is entirely up to us how and where and when people contribute. And so in my career and in my life, have realized that I have been done a major disservice by not being in community with people with disabilities. There's a lot of things that, um, when I first started this work, I was afraid, or, I didn't understand, and I had, kind of offensive language. And these are all things that were hindrances to me, not the people that I represent. And so, in doing this work, I have been opened up to a new world that I didn't even know existed before I was doing it. And I am um, really passionate that from early ages, we all deserve the gift of proximity to people with disabilities. Um, in our classroom, in our sports, and now in our work. So, competitive integrated employment is about, yes, empowering and uplifting a marginalized community that thus far, able bodied society has kept out of the workplace. But it is not just to benefit people with disabilities, it is just as much to benefit people without disabilities. So, um, of course, we have to talk a little bit about what competitive integrated employment is not. So, it is not an unfair advantage over people without disabilities. This is not to say that people with disabilities have to be given priority over people without disabilities. This is saying that if someone can do a job and do it well, that they be considered like anyone else. And so far, the playing field is not level in this way. So we are approaching fairness. We are not promoting unfairness. And then I talked a little bit about this already, is that competitive is not competitive in the typical sense of the word. Candidates with disabilities don't have to compete with candidates without disabilities. They don't have to be better than someone else to be able to work a job. It's more about what a company needs, and what a job candidate has to offer, and making a connection based on that need and that overlap of skill. And it does not mean a congregated and segregated department in the midst of an integrated workplace. So you may own a company, or be part of a company that there are people with and without disabilities working at the place. But if all the people with disabilities are in one room doing a certain type of work, that cannot be called integrated. It also can't be called integrated if you have a group of people, or even just one person coming in during off hours of a business and doing work. Um, these are all holdovers of responses that we had really early on to the inclusion of people with disabilities in the workplace. So just because we have started with a certain model doesn't mean we need to stay there forever. We are progressing to a more integrated way of living and working together. And that means that we don't necessarily need separate departments or enclaves anymore. That was a really early approach to competitive integrated employment, and we have moved on from there. So, um, I think it's pretty obvious, with the workforce crisis and the skills that I've seen in my own job candidates with disabilities, why competitive integrated employment is important. But there is always more to be said. And I think specifically as providers, we have to be informed of the national conversation and the state conversation down to our regional conversations as to why it's very important. So, competitive integrated employment isn't just something that providers came up with, and we're just using it at random. It is part of a larger context of happenings that is making integration possible for people with disabilities in the workplace. So, the first one is a state conversation, and it is something that is very unique to Kentucky, and I love. Is that Kentucky was declared by executive order as an employment first state by Governor Andy Beshear in 2020. So a lot was happening with the pandemic. A lot of us were focused on that. But if you are in the employment world, then this was a very important moment for all of us. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. Plus, competitive integrated employment, while it may seem too difficult or potentially impossible for some people, especially those with the highest barriers to work, when it is paired with the tools of customized employment, which is a process endorsed by the U.S. Department of Labor, it becomes more accessible. So we'll talk about that some as well. And then finally, it is in line with a theory that is near and dear to my heart and my organization, which is social role valorization. And that's our theory of practice here at Mattingly Edge, but it's so much more than that. But the basic tenet and how it applies to work is that people with more socially valued roles, so the perception of value like that of employee, obtain greater social capital and thus overall better lives. So I think that can be said for all of us. It's pretty hard to disagree with if you hold valued roles, then you are seen better and you're likely treated better. So that is true for people with disabilities as well. So let's dig in a little bit more to these topics. So the Employment First executive order was really to say that we as a state believe that employment is the first and preferred option for how adults with disabilities spend their day. So instead of assuming that high schoolers with disabilities need to start looking at day programs and residential facilities and ways to spend their day other than work, that just like high schoolers without disabilities, we are assuming that they are going to college or to work. And that if they are going to college, that they're going because they have a career that they found that requires a college degree. So Andy Bashir making this an executive order is a big deal because it means that as a state, we are in agreement of this, that this is our new way forward, and competitive integrated employment lays the groundwork for what being an employment first state is. So I really liked this quote from Governor Bashir, and this was part of the executive order. We are committed to righting inequities and breaking down barriers for our citizens with disabilities who desire to have a meaningful career, highlighted for a reason. Too often, people with disabilities are relegated to the sidelines in our communities when they have significant contributions to make to our workforce and society. So here, Governor Bashir is noting that people with disabilities, employees with disabilities, have important contributions to make to our society, and that they are not just to be placed in careers that we consider maybe the lowest common denominator careers, but that they are worthy of and have a right to meaningful careers. So we'll get back to that a little bit when we talk about social role valorization here in a minute. Another thing that, of course, is really near and dear to my heart is customized employment. And it is a process of person-centered planning through an extensive discovery process to get to know a job candidate, a job development phase to approach potential employers on a job candidate's behalf. And then when they are on site in a customized position that meets the needs of the employer and the job candidate, that they are receiving systematic instruction to do that work. So as defined by the Department of Labor, it's a process for achieving competitive integrated employment. See, it's right there in the name of the definition, or self-employment through an employee and employer relationship that is personalized to meet the needs of both. So the key word there is that it's personalized, is that we are starting with the needs of a business, not necessarily the job descriptions that already exist for that business, and thinking about what are the exact needs, whether it's something that's already happening or something that could be happening that would add value to that business, and creating a personalized relationship between the two. So I think customized employment because of the way that we insist on certifications, which I think are really important. It seems somewhat unattainable, I think, to a lot of providers, but that is not the case. Personalization between an employer and employee is something that any of us can do. And in fact, we do it in supported employment sometimes without even realizing that it's customized. So, for those people specifically who you may think this person has too many barriers to employment, or they don't have enough experience, or anything that might compel a person to say this person will never work, customized employment is an answer to that. And I hear it all the time. I hear it when I'm tabling at transition fairs for high schoolers that are getting ready to go to work or to college, or unfortunately, a lot of times to their parents' couch. Is that parents will say, "Oh, this sounds great, but it would never work for my child because they will never be able to work." Um, and then, of course, I'm always like, tell me more about that, right? Tell me more about what you mean by this person will never work. And typically, they go into a discussion of how their child or their loved one, only wants to play video games, or they can't speak verbally, or they choose not to, and so the workforce would be an inaccessible place for them. And of course, what I come back with is typically like, okay, so video games, they're using technology, problem solving. There's things going on there that are directly translatable to the workforce, but also these prerequisites that we've defined for being able to be part of the workplace are fabricated. It's a myth that we have told ourselves. So, for example, recently, I represented a woman to become a receptionist, and she does not communicate verbally. So, how does that work? Well, we have these text to speech devices now. She has a Dynavox, and we pre entered all of the typical scripts that she would need for answering the phone, as well as one that she can use for organic responses to say, I don't have a ready script for that. Please give me a moment to type out a response. So there are all kinds of ways that we are getting more creative with customizing a position that employers haven't seen before. And it's our job as providers to give them examples of what's possible. So in the picture here are two of my favorite job candidate and employer duos. So on the far left, Sarah Dixon is the owner of Unified Sign and Design. I'm on the far right, and in between us is Jean, who is someone that I represented in customized employment. Sarah let me come and take a look behind the scenes at her workplace, and I identified lots of tasks that I thought Jean would be really good at, including inserting braille beads into room signs, weeding and taping vinyl signs, and a myriad of other things. And while this was not a position that already existed within Unified, it was something that Sarah said would be very valuable to her to have. So we created a position out of the tasks that Jean would be really good at, not forcing her to do things she would not be good at. And we started at 4 hours a week. So Jean has been there about a year, and within the next few weeks, she'll take on an additional shift and do 8 hours a week. So customized employment can look like a lot of different things, but it starts with that relationship and ends with a personalization. And then the final way that I feel like framing competitive integrated employment can be really effective and important is by pairing it with social role valorization as a social theory. So the idea of it from Wolfensberger was that those in valued roles tend to be treated well, and those in devalued roles ill. So it sounds really simple, but it is something that I don't think in our industry of providing services that we have necessarily grappled with. It's certainly something that I had to grapple with very early on because this is our theory of practice at my organization. But basically, when we talk about valued roles, it is not about whether someone is or is not valuable. It is the perception by society. And that's something that I had to spend time unraveling for myself. And I am part of society. I come with my own biases and my own um, stigmas and misconceptions because I am not separate from the society that raised me. And it's okay to admit that and investigate that. But what we mean by valued roles are the roles that we are proud to say we have. And that could be homeowner or leaseholder or employee, parent, friend. It can be all sorts of things. But here, in the context of competitive integrated employment, it's that role of employee that is incredibly valuable and often overlooked for people with disabilities. So, competitive integrated employment is important for giving more people access to this valued role as employee. And beyond that, beyond just being an employee, thinking about specifically the best possible job or the most valued possible job with the highest pay possible at the most desirable workplace possible. So I think we're very familiar as providers with getting people positions that we've seen before, like store greeter and movie ticket terror. Um, and some of the things that we haven't seen are people in the roles that all of us as society have deemed as valuable. Um, and so thinking about expanding what we believe is possible for people at work and thinking about what is the spectrum of jobs within this field. And we want to start with the most valued for people with disabilities because they are catching up in an employment game that they have not been part of for as long as non-disabled workers. So if we're thinking about people who are cleaning out kennels, dog kennels, and someone who is an equine veterinarian, neither of those people are better than one another. They're the same in value. They both have equal value. But as society, we are going to say, wow, if someone tells us they're an equine veterinarian. And so, where do we start on that spectrum for people with disabilities? Instead of starting on the side that is less socially valuable, starting on the side that's more socially valuable and working from there. Maybe someone's not going to be an equine vet, but could they work in the reception area or be an assistant? Um, there are so many tasks that go on in a business. And I think we get stuck looking at job descriptions so often that competitive integrated employment becomes an impossibility for us because we only see what's been done before and not what could be done. So, through competitive integrated employment, coming at it with social role valorization, we are working to change how society perceives the value of people with disabilities by their proximity to work. So, work is not the only place where integration is needed. But because we live in America where we are a very work centric society, work is where it will start. We will be integrated at work before anywhere else. And I think it's a good place to start. So I wanted to end with a quote from Martin Luther King from Stride Toward Freedom. And thinking about how competitive integrated employment is really just a step towards integration. So this quote says, "Men often hate each other because they fear each other. They fear each other because they do not know each other. They do not know each other because they cannot communicate. They cannot communicate because they are separated." I say this kind of as a stay strong to all my providers out there because I think too often we see the fear and potentially even the hate that comes from this separation. And it can be really demoralizing to press for competitive integrated employment when society doesn't always want it. But we are giving people, and I say this, people without disabilities, a chance to do something different and new. And we should not take that for granted. So Thank you all for being here. I hope this gives you a little bit more of a script to talk about competitive integrated employment and why it's important, not only to employers, but to all of us as a society. So thank you.
Thank you, Mary Reed. We have a couple of things in the chat that I want to address. Especially want to follow on that quote with a comment from Kat. So I'll be reading Kat's comment. I'm enjoying the SRV term and concept. I am autistic and extremely passionate about using evolutionary psychology to make life make sense. I have conceptualized this as a community belongingness and autonomy balance. We value you in this community due to what you uniquely add to it. That's in quotes, is absolutely primal. The collaboration that comes from this is why we are capable of all the things unique to human beings. Thank you for reading my tangential TED Talk. I'm so jazzed about this. So I thought you may want to follow up on that.
I love that. Maybe you should be up here leading this. But absolutely. Yeah, I think it is, like you were saying, an innate need to contribute. We don't feel full unless we are giving of ourselves. And that is, unfortunately, something that's been denied to people with disabilities far too long, often placed in, I didn't mention what devalued roles often are, but people with disabilities are often thrust into devalued roles of eternal child or patient or burden. And all of those have a similarity, which is that they are non contributing roles. And so you are exactly correct and spot on, is that the main point of a socially valued role is what it contributes. So, as much as I don't love it, I don't think that everyone should have to contribute anything to be valued. That is just how our brains work, and why I think work is such an important place to start.
I agree. I think it's literally threatens our sense of safety from like food, water, sex, shelter, all of that stuff when we don't have that you are a unique and important part, but you also belong. You have to have both of those. So I was getting jazzed listening to you talk. Thanks for reading that, Miss Potter.
My pleasure.
I'm jazzed that you're jazzed, so excellent.
Okay, and you also had a question from Laura. Is customized the same as the term carved out position?
So this is a weird one. It's not necessarily, because when we think of job carving, we're thinking of things that may already being done within a business. So carving, and my mentor Milton Tyree is on too, so I would gladly invite him to interrupt me if I'm misspeaking. But is that I think there are carved tasks that can be part of customized employment, but customized employment is also looking at unmet needs or things that maybe an employer has always wanted to do but never had the capacity to do. And kind of thinking about, yes, what is going on here? What are things that we may be able to carve into a position, but also what's not going on here that could be. And so, yes and no.
Did that answer your question, Laura? And Milton gave lots of thumbs up. I'm sorry, did I lose someone's audio? No? Is it my audio?
I can hear you.
I'm
Okay.
Laura. Were you talking to me?
Yes, I'm sorry. I think you spoke earlier and I didn't hear you.
Yeah, it did answer my question. And I have a follow-up question. In regards to the position where she showed us the woman who was working and they had found the customized job that she could do, that she's doing 4 hours a week, which I think is wonderful. Did you approach that employer knowing that they would be a receptive employer to having something like that? Or was that just a shot in the dark kind of thing? I think that's our problem here as employment specialists at the high school level, is finding those companies willing to take a chance on offering even a 4 hour customized position like that. Sorry for the long-windedness. I don't know how else to describe it.
No, absolutely. So Sarah, and she would not mind me sharing this because I've heard her share it on a webinar, actually is the mom of someone with a disability, and he's little, right? Like he's like 7. But she feels strongly that the practices that she's using as an employer will affect the opportunities that he has later in life. But I will say before we came in to do what we call a needs analysis, which is like identifying what kinds of tasks are going on there, she straight up told me I would be open to hiring someone, but I don't think you're going to find anything back here.
Okay, yeah.
And so she was open to the idea. She was receptive, but she really did not think that I was going to find anything at her business. And that is common. So you're going to have some employers that are like, I'm not into the idea and I don't want you to look. You kind of have to just let them go. But then you're going to have some employers that say, I'm open to it. I have no idea what it's going to look like. Those are the ones that you have a chance with. And so after she showed us all these things, and I came with a proposal to say, I think this would be really helpful. And one thing that I didn't mention is that before Jean, Sarah has all these wonderful workers, and a lot of them are working on massive orders. So they have a contract with Norton, and they do everything from like the 20-foot electrical sign outside of the skyscraper down to each individual room sign. And of course, the big signs that required electrical work were getting all of the attention. And so 2 days before an order would go out, she would pull the entire staff to come and work on these small signs that now Jean is chipping away at for 4 hours per week. So she no longer has to pull all of those workers to do an all hands on deck. She has someone who's consistently working away at it, so that there's not this level of panic when an order goes out. And so it's really important too to look at, if an employer will let you, where they're struggling. Some employers are really hesitant to show you where they're struggling, but if you can find that, then you can offer them a solution to their issues.
Thank you.
We're going to take a brief pause because I want to honor those of you who came for the presentation and your time. And then we'll get back to some more discussion. I hope you can stay for more questions and answers with Mary Reed, as well as talking with Tip. But we're going to drop the evaluation link in the chat right now. And I really appreciate any of those of you who have to leave, if you can complete that evaluation to help Tip staff learn more about what you need. This is really beneficial to the presenter as well as the TIP project. Also going to drop in invitations for our June 23rd Community of Practice event and our master class coming up June 24th with Dr. Phil Rumrill, setting the record straight about hiring and retaining disabled workers, debunking myths. So that information will be in the chat. And also want to let you know that the recording of today's presentation, along with a copy of Mary Reed's PowerPoint presentation, will be available on the tiptrain.com website in a couple of days. So keep your eyes out for that. But thank you for letting me address the housekeeping things. And I want to get back to some things that were put in the chat. I saw that Kat said this is an excellent resource that goes a step further by educating employers on why it is beneficial to hire autistic employees